Have you ever been to a place where everyone was smiling and laughing, but their eyes made you feel like you shouldn't be there? Have you ever been denied your existence by your own blood relatives right in front of strangers? And then you stood there silently, not because you were weak, but because you knew you no longer belonged here. Today, I will tell you a true story about a woman who was called a defective product right at her sister's wedding party. A person was once forced to drop out of school by his parents, scolded that he was a burden, and then kicked out of the house like a stranger. But that same woman, after nearly a decade of living in silence and effort, became a CEO, the wife of a prestigious doctor, and the mother of a lovely boy. You will see a turning the tables scene without revenge, just temperament and truth. Maybe you're wondering, how can a person abandoned by his whole family walk with his head held high into the very place that once called him disgrace? Come back to that moment with me, a luxurious wedding, an unexpected encounter, and a truth about to be revealed. When I entered the luxurious lobby of the hotel that day, the first thing I felt was not the melodious music, sparkling crystal lights, or the smell of fresh flowers. It's the feeling. I don't belong here. I attended the wedding at the invitation of my husband's friends, a couple I only knew through a few social encounters. I don't have a bouquet of flowers in my hand, nor any outstanding designer dress. I only wore the elegant long dress that my husband once gave me, and held a peaceful smile. My husband was busy shaking hands and greeting old acquaintances. I politely nodded, then took the opportunity to go to the bathroom. But as I walked out, I heard a few whispers. The words were clear, as if they were intentionally meant for me to hear. What is this excuse coming here for? It wasn't invited. Why did it appear here? I stopped. A cold feeling ran down my spine. They didn't look directly at me, but that scornful voice seemed to pierce through space, piercing straight into my heart. When you grow up in a family where love is always conditional, you learn to be quiet. You learn to ignore the words that hurt you the most, because you know, if you react, they will say you are too sensitive. And that day, I also chose to be silent. I turned away not because I was afraid, but because I no longer owed anyone my presence. You try to move on, the more the past pulls you back. A hand firmly squeezed my arm from behind. A voice shouted, "Hey, stop." And that was the moment everything began to explode, no longer just strange whispers, but a secret that had been hidden for nearly 10 years, waiting to be revealed. Before I could react, a woman ran over. She called me by a name I hadn't heard in many years, and so the past began to come flooding back, bringing with it faces that seemed to have gone away forever. The woman walked quickly toward me, pulling a look filled with anger, not confusion, not unfamiliarity, but very personal, very old anger. She grabbed my hand and gasped, "Stop! Why are you here?" I looked at that face and saw something familiar. And then a name was uttered, Julia, and everything broke inside me. She is my biological sister. Just then, another woman appeared, older, with a frown on her face. She was not invited. She is my family's faulty child. Defective item, defective item. They don't whisper anymore. They spoke loudly, clear, right in the middle of a banquet hall full of luxurious guests. I stood there, trying to stay calm. Not because I'm weak, but because I'm so used to labels like that. Since childhood, I was always called not like anyone in the family, not as pretty as my sister, not good at communicating, not knowing how to please adults. And when did not like anyone else turn into not worthy? In America, where individual freedom and human rights are promoted, many people may think that such things only happen in movies. But in reality, there are many people who grew up in families like that, where love is something that must be exchanged, and if you don't fit their model, you become a fragment. Like the video viewer once shared with me, I'm the oldest child. My mother told me I wasn't as pretty as that I should sacrifice and give in. I used to believe I was useless until I left home and discovered it wasn't me who was wrong, but they were too strict with what they couldn't control, my true self. And yes, that day at the wedding, I was no longer afraid of their eyes. I just feel sad because they still live in the old world where a person's value is determined by appearance, by academic qualifications, by eye candy. As soon as the name Hazel rang out in the crowd, the faces that had abandoned me suddenly changed color. And then, my husband appeared. The only man who ever asked me, "Hazel, why do you believe they are family?" When Julia called me her sister, and my mother repeated that I was the child they raised, I realized something. The people who cut me out of their lives still haven't let go. I have been away from home for almost 10 years. During that time, I learned how to live, how to survive, and most importantly, how to heal. I used to think that if I went far enough, if I lived differently enough, the past would no longer cling to me. But standing in the middle of that wedding hall, I suddenly understood the past does not disappear. It's just waiting for the right moment to come back, testing to see if you're still as weak as before. My childhood was quiet days. In a seemingly standard house with a family clinic, my father is a doctor, my mother is a nurse, my sister is a precious gem, and I am the shadow. They said I wasn't pretty enough to appear in front of patients, not smart enough to go to college. They took all my books, wet them with tap water, and then told me I didn't try and blamed others. I was once locked out of the yard on a winter night just because I didn't give my sister a warm coat. And then the next morning, I still had to go to school as if nothing had happened, no apology, no questions. I remember one time, a neighbor gave me an old coat, then whispered, "If you need any help, just knock on my door. People may see that you are invisible in the house, but I won't see that." Those words have followed me for many years. Sometimes, just one person seeing you is enough to keep you going. I know that in America, where many people grow up in divided, patriarchal, or very cold families, stories like mine are not rare. There are many people who have had to learn how to be adults since they were children, just because the people who should have loved them were the ones who hurt them the most. While the harsh words of my mother and sister were still echoing, a warm voice rang out from behind. "Hazel, are you here? It's Philip, my husband." And just by looking at me, I knew I don't need anyone anymore. When my mother shouted in front of guests, "He's just a high school graduate. He can't do anything," I didn't react. Not because her words were true, but because they were too old to still hurt me. I graduated from high school with high marks, but instead of being able to choose a university, I was told to go to work immediately. My dad looked straight at me and said, "You have no future. What's the point in studying? It's best to work and contribute to the house." So I did. I bussed food at a restaurant, worked as a librarian at night, and then worked as a part-time maid for the elderly in the neighborhood. I live quietly. I don't have anything outstanding other than two things: notebooks and a desire for freedom. Every day I record everything: income, expenses, emotions. And every week, I save a few dollars in a savings account. I learned how to invest, how to calculate risk, and how to open a personal account without my parents sponsoring me. I enrolled in a community college. I study part-time at night. I don't show off to anyone. Do not update social networks. Do not share with relatives. Because I know, if they knew, they would destroy it. Then I learned more about nutrition, a field that I later built into a hospital catering chain. The idea came from the times I waited for my mother in the clinic, observing elderly patients having to eat cold, poorly nutritious food. Gradually, from a girl carrying tables and chairs, I became a person signing contracts with medical facilities. There was no brilliant startup. There are no media articles or images. There is only one silent journey, long, durable, and writing one's own value. In America, people often honor those who drop out and succeed, but few people mention those who go back to school in silence. I am one of them. Not making a splash, but persistent enough to move forward. And then, in the midst of that silent journey, I met Philip. He didn't ask me what degree I had. He just asked, "Do you have any unfulfilled dreams?" And from that moment, I knew I was no longer alone on this path. When Philip walked into the wedding hall that day and saw me surrounded by angry faces, he didn't need to ask anything. He just gently walked over, grabbed my hand, and said, "Hazel, I've been looking for you everywhere. Are you okay?" Just that one question, simple, but all I ever wanted to hear from my loved ones. Not a scolding, not a judgmental look, just genuine concern. Philip did not appear as a savior, but as a companion, standing next to me, not knowing where I came from, only caring where I was going. We met at a medical conference. I was introducing an innovative catering model to the hospital, and he was the guest of honor. You're not surprised because I'm a CEO. He was surprised because I knew how to listen to every little detail about the patient. "You're not just building a company," he once said. "You're building something that makes other people better cared for." Philip comes from a family of famous doctors, but has never made me feel inferior. On the contrary, he always asked my opinion about seemingly small things, like choosing a menu for diabetics, or my feelings about the way a doctor talks to an elderly patient. In times when I doubt myself, he reminds me, there are no wounds you have to hide. You don't need to be someone else to be loved. I know many women out there carry the same scars as me, and they are afraid. They think no one will love a broken person. But sometimes those cracks let light through. And it is the person who sees beauty through the cracks who deserves to stay in your life. But not everyone knows how to see with those eyes. Julia, who my parents once considered a perfect gem, is hiding a truth that no one expected. I used to think that Julia, my younger sister, was the ideal model that every parent dreams of, beautiful, confident, and always praised. From a young age, Julia was able to wear new dresses, eat her own food, and always sit next to her parents at every meal. What about me? I sat at the side table, wore old clothes, and learned to quietly fold my own clothes and cook for myself since I was 12 years old. They call Julia the future of the family, the one who will continue her father's medical career. She doesn't need to make any effort, just be present. And whenever I achieved something, Julia just frowned or looked sad, and my credit was immediately dismissed. "Why do you make me feel abandoned?" my mother once told me it was only because I was chosen to be the class representative. I was used to Julia always winning until that day. At her own wedding reception, the truth began to crack. When Daniel, Julia's husband, realized I was Hazel Anderson, he was speechless. He didn't know his wife had a sister like me, and he didn't know his wife's sister was a CEO in the medical industry. And what surprised me more was that Daniel's gaze towards Julia began to change. It's as if the pieces he once trusted are falling apart little by little. I once heard somewhere that children who are pampered too much will grow up lost because they never know what is real. Julia is a living example. She believes that if a lie is beautiful enough, the world will believe it is true. She told Daniel that she graduated from a prestigious university, had a degree in medical administration, and was running the business at her family's clinic. But the truth is, she never passed the high school entrance exam. I'm not happy about exposing my sister. Actually, I was sad because Julia had all the opportunities I ever dreamed of, but didn't appreciate any of them. Truth, once ignited, illuminates everything, even the darkest corners. And when Daniel decided to test what Julia had said about education, right in front of us. You know that moment in the movies when everything that seems perfect suddenly falls apart because of one question. It happened right in the middle of Julia's wedding. Daniel, the newlywed husband, has always believed in the image Julia painted, an intellectual woman with a degree, understanding medical management, and continuing her work at the family clinic. But after a short conversation with me, his view of his wife began to change. "You said you graduated from medical school, so tell me the name of a professor you studied with." It was just a simple question, but Julia stood still, her eyes rolling continuously, her throat dry. She stammered a few sentences, then changed the subject. Daniel did not let go. If you're telling the truth, call that professor right now. My family is very close to them. No one had time to stop Julia. In a moment of panic, she snatched the phone from Daniel's hand and slammed it on the marble floor. The sound of cracking sounded like a slap to the confidence of everyone present. The guests were silent. The service staff stopped moving. No more music. Only the sound of heavy breathing and stunned eyes remained. I stood next to Philip. He gently squeezed my hand as if to say, "You got over it." And they ... are still stuck. I said nothing. I don't need it. The truth spoke for me. That collapse did not come from the exposure of others. It comes from Julia trying to build a castle with fake bricks. When people live on shells, sooner or later someone will knock on it and hear a hollow sound. I know there are many people who have been defamed and despised by their relatives just because they are not sparkling like someone in the family. But sometimes, that shimmering person is just a mirror. And then it will break when it can no longer reflect anything real. I think it will stop there. But I was wrong. When my parents, who once called me a burden, came back to see me, it wasn't to apologize, but to ask for help. A month after that chaotic wedding, I thought everything had calmed down. I'm busy with work, taking care of my son, and planning a new community nutrition project with Philip. The past, with all its heaviness, is behind. I stopped thinking about Julia or my parents until an unexpected call came to Philip's hospital. "We are Hazel's parents. We need to see her. It's urgent." They don't say girls. They don't have any family feelings at all. Just a little girl, as if I were an asset that could be reused when needed. I didn't hear that directly, but my husband's parents do. They happened to be at the hospital, visiting Philip, and heard every sentence clearly. And when the other to deliberately named themselves son-in-law as a doctor, heir to Anderson General Hospital, hoping to have priority in meeting me, my parents-in-law just gently replied, "Hazel has no parents but us." Those words was the first time I felt like I really had a home. I heard that after the incident at the wedding, the bad news about how my parents views their biological children began to spread. The family clinic lost customers. Partners withdraw. They came to me with the hope that I would repay the kindness of nurturing. But they don't understand meaning only exists when there is love. And love, they have personally denied it for a long time. Many people have texted me. I also have a mother who only remembers me when she needs money. I was called a failure until I succeeded. And then they came ... asking for a share. Karma is not harsh revenge. Karma is the truth revealed at the right time, letting everyone see who chose to live selfishly, who chose to let go and move on. I don't hate them, but I didn't turn back either. Because now, I am living for more important things: a small warm family, a son who is growing up in love, and a life that I built myself. After all that had happened, from the chaotic wedding, to the painful expose, to the botched meeting, react with anger. I don't scream. I don't retaliate. I don't need anyone to apologize. I just walked away. There is a unique power in leaving places that are no longer worthy of your heart. Not because you no longer care, but because you have grown enough to understand that not everything that hurts requires a reaction. In a world where people often think you have to retaliate to be strong, silence at the right time is what makes others think the most. I don't need to tell my parents they were wrong. They know it already. They just don't dare admit it yet. I don't need to prove to my sister that I've succeeded. Because true happiness doesn't need to be displayed. It naturally exists in my eyes, in the way I hold my children's hands, in the laughter I share with my husband every evening. I once read an article online that said, "You know you're truly healed when you can smile and move on. No need to get right. No need to hold back." And I thought, that's what I did. We left the wedding party that day without looking back. On the way home, Philip held my hand and asked softly, "Do you feel relieved?" I smiled, then nodded. "Okay, let's stop by the bakery. I heard they have a hot coconut mango mousse." We both burst out laughing. And in that moment, I knew this is real family. No need for title, just love and peace. But life still goes on. While I nurture my son's future, those who abandon me continue to stumble because of the very choices they made. And in the end, they themselves had to face the consequences that no one could bear for them. When I look at my son, a 5-year-old boy with clear eyes and a smile that lights up the room, I no longer think of my own childhood as something to regret. I think of it as a reminder, you deserve a different start, and I will be the one to write it. I grew up in a home where all gentleness was conditional, where love came with control, where you had to meet standards to be heard. But with my son, no conditions are needed. As long as you are yourself, that is the most precious thing in the world. I told my child about the days when my mother used to cry in silence, but also said that those tears watered the seeds of strength in her. I teach my children not to be afraid of failure, because she has failed many times and still got up. I tell my children that family is not a place where you are afraid to go home ... but a place where you can be yourself, loved, asked questions, and hugged when you're sad. Recently, after a medical examination, my child turned to me and asked, "Mom, do you have to go to work early tomorrow?" I nodded, and I said, "I'll save the cookies for Mom. Let her finish eating before continuing to work." Just a small action, but to me, it's proof that loving, giving heart. Don't repeat the cycle of hurt I once had. I'm no longer trying to prove anything with the past. I live for the moment. And most of all, I live for my child's future. A future that is not bound by judgments, distorted expectations, or dreams that do not belong to me. We cannot choose where we start, but we can choose where our children begin again. Let the past be the foundation, not the chain. And let true love be the greatest legacy you leave. If you are raising a child while healing the wounded child within yourself, then you are a silent warrior. Let's continue, because every step you take is creating a new path, not just for you, but for the next generation.